The land opens without boundary, a wide skin of grass stretched under a sky that moves more than it rests. Wind crosses the steppe with no obstacle, pressing the grasses flat, then lifting them again, leaving no trace of passage. In winter, the earth hardens and sound carries far. In summer, dust rises from hooves and settles slowly, as if reluctant to return. Rivers cut narrow lines through the plain, their banks dark with reeds and memory. Nothing here offers shelter without effort. Everything must be assembled, folded, moved, and rebuilt, again and again, as the seasons insist. Within this space, a small encampment wakes before the light strengthens. A man moves among the tethered animals, checking knots stiffened by frost, loosening one, tightening another. He is not marked by rank. His coat is patched, his boots worn thin at the heel. He works because work must be done before the wind sharpens. Around him, others rise in similar silence. The day begins without signal. Survival does not wait for command. Responsibility comes early on the steppe, before names carry weight. A child learns where to stand when animals surge, where to turn when weather shifts without warning. This man learned the same lessons long ago. He remembers hunger before he remembers ambition. The obligation to keep the herd alive, to find water, to avoid conflict when numbers are thin, has shaped his days more than any dream of dominance. Authority here begins as burden, not desire. Paths exist, but they are not roads. They are remembered lines between rivers, hills, and winter pastures, held in the mind rather than marked on the ground. Trade moves along these lines. Felt, hides, livestock, metal brought from far settlements where walls do not move. Exchange is careful, measured by need rather than profit. Justice is personal and immediate. A dispute cannot be delayed. Delay weakens the group. Decisions are made in the open, under the same sky that will judge their consequences. Disorder is never distant. A neighboring clan presses too close to a grazing area. Horses disappear in the night. No one speaks of hatred. The problem is practical. If unaddressed, it will return. The man listens to others, weighing the cost of action against the cost of restraint. He knows that violence solves little if it fractures alliances that will be needed when winter tightens its grip. When pressure rises, impulse suggests speed. He resists it. A hasty strike invites retaliation. A feud consumes seasons. Instead, he chooses a measured response. Messengers ride with gifts and warnings balanced carefully together. Strength is shown without being spent. The decision is not praised. It is accepted. Restraint rarely announces itself. From such choices, patterns form. Agreements are repeated, then remembered. A rule emerges not written but enforced through shared necessity. Grazing boundaries are honored because breaking them brings predictable consequence. Leadership becomes less about command than about maintaining these expectations. Method replaces impulse. Precedent steadies behavior. Over time, stability allows expansion without spectacle. Families attach themselves to those who manage conflict well. Camps grow, not through conquest but through confidence. The man feels the weight of more lives depending on decisions that once affected only a few. Movement becomes slower. Planning extends further ahead. The wind still crosses the grass as before, indifferent to the change. The cost is quiet and cumulative. Sleep shortens. Losses are counted privately. An elder dies during a harsh winter. A child does not survive illness. Leadership offers no protection from grief. It only ensures that grief is carried without collapse. Fatigue settles into the bones, as constant as the cold. As years pass, the man understands that what endures is not his presence, but the habits he has helped shape. Younger figures observe, imitate, adapt. Responsibility shifts gradually without ceremony. The steppe remains. Camps will move. Names will fade. What persists is the fragile order built from restraint, repeated under an open sky, where continuity depends on those who choose obligation before desire. Spring returns without announcement. Snow thins along the riverbanks, revealing dark soil pressed flat by months of cold. Meltwater swells the streams, loosening stones that have held their place since the last thaw. The grass does not rush its return. It comes unevenly, testing the patience of those who depend on it. Wind carries the scent of damp earth and animal hair, a reminder that movement must begin again. The steppe never allows rest to harden into habit. The man rides early before the camp fully stirs. His horse moves at an unhurried pace, conserving strength. He watches the land more than the horizon, noting where water pools too long, where grazing will soon thin. His attention is practical, almost narrow. Leadership here is not vision cast far ahead, but clarity held close. Each decision presses against the next like stones stacked to keep a fire from spreading. More people now travel within the orbit of his choices. Their wagons follow familiar rhythms, spacing themselves by custom rather than order. He does not issue commands for this. The pattern has formed through repetition, through small corrections made over many seasons. When he intervenes, it is brief. A nod, a gesture, a pause long enough to be understood. Authority settles where noise does not. Trade grows heavier as spring opens the paths. Metal tools arrive from the south, exchanged for hides cured through winter labor. Salt changes hands. News travels with these goods, fragmentary and unreliable. The man listens without urgency. Rumors have weight only when tested against need. He knows that reacting too quickly to distant threats can expose weakness closer to home. Tensions surface as camps converge near water. Animals crowd the banks. Voices rise, then fall. The man waits before stepping forward, allowing frustration to empty itself. When he speaks, it is to restate what has already been practiced. Turns are taken. Time is divided. The river is shared because it must be. Enforcement is collective, quiet, and firm. No one benefits from escalation when the season is still young. A younger leader challenges the arrangement, not with weapons but with refusal. He withholds access, testing limits. The response is measured. Grazing elsewhere is adjusted, supplies tightened. Pressure replaces confrontation. Days pass. The challenge weakens under its own cost. Compliance returns without victory declared. Disorder is absorbed rather than crushed. From this, a clearer structure emerges. Responsibilities are assigned by ability, not lineage. One watches herds, another manages exchange, another mediates disputes. These roles shift as conditions demand, but the idea of function takes hold. Survival becomes coordinated. The group moves not as scattered families, but as an interdependent whole. Expansion follows this coordination. Smaller bands align themselves for protection against uncertainty rather than aggression. The man accepts them cautiously, aware that growth carries friction. He insists on shared practice before shared defense. Unity is built through routine, not proclamation. Stability becomes the offering. The burden deepens. Decisions multiply. Each choice closes other paths. The man feels the narrowing of freedom that accompanies responsibility. He rides less for himself, more for others. The steppe remains wide, but his days do not. Fatigue becomes a constant companion, neither resisted nor indulged. As summer settles, he senses the shift from personal influence to collective momentum. Systems now move without his presence. Agreements hold when he is absent. Younger figures step forward naturally, shaped by example rather than instruction. He understands that endurance lies not in control, but in transmission. When evening comes, wind again crosses the grass, flattening it briefly before letting it rise. Fires burn low. Movement slows. The land absorbs the traces of another season, reminding those who live upon it that continuity is not claimed, only maintained. through patient balance repeated until it no longer bears a name. Summer lengthens the days, stretching light across the plain until evening feels postponed. Heat settles into the ground, drawing insects from the grass and pulling animals toward shade that barely exists. The wind weakens, then returns without pattern, carrying dust that clings to skin and cloth. Water becomes a measure of time. Each camp calculates its distance from the next source, not in miles, but in endurance. The land offers abundance briefly and demands foresight immediately. The man adjusts his movements to this rhythm. He rises earlier, rests longer at midday, watches the herds for signs of strain. His attention has sharpened with years of repetition. He knows which animals will falter first, which people will hide fatigue until it becomes dangerous. Leadership has become an act of constant observation, quiet and unbroken, like counting breaths through heat. With growth comes friction. New families bring their own customs, their own memories of grievance. Old agreements are tested by unfamiliar hands. The man listens more than he speaks, allowing stories to surface fully before weighing them. He understands that conflict often grows from misalignment rather than malice. Correction, when needed, is applied gently but firmly, as one straightens a warped pole before it snaps. Trade routes thicken in summer. Caravans appear more frequently, their animals lean, their drivers cautious. Goods circulate faster now, grain, cloth, metal shaped into more precise tools. With them come expectations of regular exchange. The man recognizes the opportunity and the risk. Dependence can strengthen bonds, but it can also narrow options. He allows trade to expand but insists on dispersal. No single route, no single partner is allowed to dominate. Justice grows more deliberate. Disputes are no longer settled only by proximity or force. Elders are consulted. Patterns of behavior are recalled. The man encourages this memory, knowing that consistency builds trust more effectively than severity. Punishment remains rare. Restitution becomes preferred. Order is maintained through predictability rather than fear. A threat emerges not from outside, but within. A group grows impatient with restraint, seeking faster gain through raids beyond agreed boundaries. The temptation is familiar. The man recognizes it from earlier years, when survival felt narrower and risk more tolerable. Now the cost is clearer. Retaliation would spiral outward, drawing the whole into cycles that consume stability. He chooses containment. Those inclined toward disruption are separated from shared resources. They are not exiled but limited. The message is plain without being spoken. Participation requires adherence. After days of tension, the group fragments on its own terms. Some leave. Those who remain adjust. The system absorbs the loss without breaking. From this separation, a stronger structure forms. Expectations are now understood as conditions, not suggestions. Authority becomes less personal, more procedural. The man feels a subtle shift. He is no longer the center through which all decisions pass. He becomes a reference point, consulted rather than followed blindly. This reduction brings relief as well as unease. The cost continues to accumulate. He notices the weight in his limbs, the delay in recovery after long rides. Names slip his memory, then return slowly. He compensates by relying more on others, trusting the systems he helped establish. Letting go becomes an act of discipline. As summer begins to fade, grass is yellow and insects thin. Camps prepare to move again. The man watches these preparations with a different awareness. What once required his presence now unfolds through shared habit. The steppe does not mark this change. It continues, indifferent, teaching again that continuity belongs not to those who lead longest, but to those who shape practices that endure beyond their reach. Autumn arrives through subtraction. Heat loosens its grip, insects disappear, and the grass thins until the earth shows through in patches of dull brown. Wind returns with steadier purpose, carrying the smell of drying plants and distant rain. Camps begin to contract, their movements slower, more deliberate. Each choice now is weighed against the approaching cold. The land narrows as winter comes into view. The man senses this tightening in his own routines. Routes once flexible are now fixed. Pastures are chosen not for abundance, but for shelter. He rides less widely, focusing instead on maintaining coherence among those who depend on shared preparation. Leadership shifts again, away from mediation and toward coordination. Storage, repair, and timing take precedence over negotiation. Labor becomes more visible. Felt is thickened, hides are cured with care, tools are mended rather than replaced. The man observes these efforts closely, not to direct them but to ensure balance. Too much attention to one task weakens another. Survival requires proportion. He intervenes only when imbalance threatens to spread. Markets thin as caravans withdraw. Exchange becomes cautious and local. Trust replaces variety. The man accepts fewer goods, prioritizing reliability over novelty. Information slows with the trade, leaving gaps that must be filled by inference rather than report. He adjusts by strengthening internal observation. The group must rely on what it can see and prepare for, not what it hears. Disorder presses from scarcity rather than ambition. A family loses animals to illness. Another falls behind during movement. The man weighs the cost of assistance against the risk of precedent. He chooses support, but limits it in duration and scope. Aid is offered as bridge, not foundation. Dependence is avoided without abandoning obligation. A quiet confrontation emerges when expectations are tested. Some argue that past contributions warrant greater claim to resources. The man listens, then returns the discussion to shared practice. Memory is acknowledged, but it does not override present need. The decision is restrained, impersonal, and therefore accepted with reluctance rather than rebellion. From these decisions, a clearer institutional rhythm develops. Winter councils are scheduled by season rather than crisis. Responsibilities are reaffirmed publicly, without ceremony. The act of repetition itself becomes stabilizing. The man recognizes that structure now provides what personal authority once did. Expansion pauses. This is not retreat but consolidation. The group turns inward, refining its methods. The man feels the tension between motion and preservation and chooses stillness. Stability, he knows, is not always visible. Sometimes it is the absence of fracture. The internal cost sharpens in this season. Long nights leave space for doubt. He measures past decisions against present conditions, aware that correction is no longer simple. Fatigue deepens, but with it comes clarity. Control has given way to stewardship. As the first snow threatens the horizon, he observes younger figures taking initiative without instruction. They prepare routes, assign labor, settle disputes using established patterns. His role recedes further, not through loss but through completion. The steppe darkens under cloud, holding the promise of winter, and with it the reminder that endurance depends on systems shaped to withstand what no individual can command. Winter arrives without spectacle. Snow falls thinly at first, then with persistence, flattening the grass and erasing familiar markers. Sound dulls under the weight of cold. Movement slows, not from reluctance but from calculation. Breath becomes visible, then precious. The land reduces itself to essentials, demanding the same from those who remain upon it. The man moves less now, conserving strength. His presence is felt through preparation already completed rather than through action. Shelters are positioned where wind breaks naturally. Supplies are counted again and again, not from anxiety but from habit. He has learned that certainty in scarcity comes from repetition, not reassurance. Responsibility presses hardest in this season. A mistake cannot be corrected easily when distance hardens and time contracts. The man feels the weight of every prior choice in the way people endure the cold. He watches for signs of quiet failure, a child too still, an animal lagging behind. Intervention is discreet, timely, and limited. Survival depends on early restraint more than late heroics. Systems reveal their strength under pressure. Rotations of watch and labor hold without reminder. Disputes are fewer, not because need has vanished, but because expectation has settled deeply. Justice now operates through anticipation. People adjust their behavior before conflict arises. Order exists in the spaces where nothing happens. A threat emerges from beyond the snowline. Another confederation, driven inward by harsher conditions, presses against shared winter grounds. There is no anger in this movement, only necessity. The man understands the logic immediately. He does not prepare for confrontation, but for endurance. The question is not who prevails, but who remains intact. He chooses negotiation shaped by limits. Access is offered narrowly, tied to clear conditions. Movement is regulated. The cold enforces compliance more effectively than force. The arrangement holds, not because it is generous, but because it is precise. Violence is avoided, not out of mercy, but because it would fracture what little stability winter allows. From this restraint, a precedent settles. Boundaries in scarcity become as important as openness in abundance. The rule is simple and severe. Survival is shared but not surrendered. The man senses the quiet acceptance of this principle spreading through the group. It does not inspire loyalty. It produces reliability. The internal cost sharpens. Cold seeps into the joints. Sleep fractures into short intervals. Losses are absorbed without ceremony. The man marks each one privately, understanding that leadership does not exempt him from grief, only from display. Fatigue becomes a constant, shaping his thoughts with blunt clarity. As winter deepens, he steps back further, allowing others to enforce what has already been agreed. His authority now resides more in memory than in presence. The systems hold. That knowledge brings a form of rest, brief but real. When the wind shifts and snow drifts again across the steppe, erasing tracks almost as soon as they are made, the man recognizes the pattern he has lived within. Survival narrows life, but it also distills it, leaving behind only what can endure repeated pressure without breaking. The thaw begins unevenly. Ice loosens its hold during the day, only to return at night, cracking the surface of streams and softening the ground into uncertainty. Snow withdraws into shaded hollows, leaving the open steppe exposed and pale. Movement resumes cautiously. Each step tests the earth before committing weight. The season teaches patience through instability. The man watches this transition with practiced attention. He does not hurry the return to wider travel. Early grass deceives, offering promise before substance. He keeps the group close, allowing animals to recover strength gradually. Leadership here is restraint extended over time, resisting the urge to reclaim motion too quickly. Responsibilities begin to shift outward again. Repair replaces preservation. Wagons are refitted, tack adjusted, routes reviewed. The man participates only where his presence steadies rather than directs. He notices that instructions are increasingly unnecessary. Others anticipate needs, drawing on shared memory of past transitions. The system responds to change with less friction. Trade reappears cautiously, like the first birds of the season. Caravans move slowly, probing conditions. Exchange resumes in fragments. The man allows it to rebuild in layers, mindful of the vulnerabilities exposed by winter dependence. Diversification becomes an unspoken rule. No single source is trusted fully. Balance is restored through distribution. A test arises as boundaries loosen. Younger members push outward, eager to explore new grazing lands revealed by retreating snow. The impulse is familiar, sharpened by confinement. The man does not suppress it but channels it. Scouts move first, unburdened. Information returns before families follow. Expansion is measured by knowledge, not desire. From these movements, coordination strengthens. Signals are standardized. Meeting points are reaffirmed. Time becomes shared again, counted by agreed intervals rather than individual judgment. The man recognizes that these practices now operate independently of him. His role has become calibration rather than control. The internal cost persists, though it changes form. Physical fatigue eases slightly, replaced by a quieter exhaustion. He feels the weight of continuity pressing forward without his constant effort. Letting it proceed requires trust, and trust carries its own strain. He measures his words more carefully, aware that each carries amplified consequence. As the season stabilizes, the group expands modestly, drawing in smaller bands seeking the reliability they have observed. The man accepts them through established processes, no longer adapting the system for each arrival. Consistency becomes the offering. Stability attracts without announcement. He reflects briefly on the narrowing of his own path. Where once his days were defined by immediate tasks, they are now shaped by absence. The group functions when he steps aside. This realization brings neither relief nor regret, only adjustment. Leadership has altered its form. When the steppe fully opens again and grass thickens under steady rain, the man rides at the edge of the movement, observing rather than guiding. The land absorbs the traces of winter and reveals the continuity beneath change, reminding those who move upon it that endurance depends less on momentum than on the quiet discipline to proceed only when the ground is ready. Late spring settles into the steppe with a steadier rhythm. Grass grows dense and resilient, no longer tentative. Rivers run clear within their banks, no longer swollen by meltwater. The wind returns to its familiar pattern, no longer sharp, no longer erratic, but constant enough to shape movement without disrupting it. The land appears open again, yet it carries the memory of constraint beneath its surface. The man now rides less often at the front. He moves along the margins, observing how decisions are made in his absence. Disputes arise and are resolved before reaching him. Tasks are assumed without instruction. Responsibility circulates. He recognizes this not as loss of influence, but as confirmation that the structure has matured beyond dependence on a single presence. With stability comes awareness of scale. Paths once sufficient for small groups now bear heavier traffic. Grazing rotations must be recalculated. Water access requires coordination across greater distances. The man participates in these discussions sparingly, allowing others to articulate solutions first. When he intervenes, it is to align competing ideas rather than replace them. Order now emerges from synthesis, not direction. Markets expand again, but differently than before. Exchange becomes more regulated, shaped by seasonal agreements rather than impulse. Measures are standardized. Obligations are remembered across years, not just encounters. The man observes that trust has become institutional rather than personal. Reputation now attaches to the Confederation itself, not only to individuals within it. A controlled confrontation tests this shift. A neighboring group attempts to bypass established routes, seeking advantage through speed. The response is immediate but restrained. Access points are closed. Trade is paused. Communication remains open but firm. The man does not lead the response, he supports it. The system asserts itself without escalation. The challenge dissolves under predictability. From this moment, authority settles into method. Rules are no longer reinforced through presence, but through expectation. Enforcement becomes collective. The man feels the distance growing between decision and emotion. This separation stabilizes outcomes, but it also alters the texture of leadership. Power becomes quieter, heavier, and less visible. Expansion resumes, not through force, but through alignment. Groups accustomed to instability attach themselves to the Confederation's routines. Integration is slow, conditional, and deliberate. The man insists on time as the primary measure of trust. Continuity is valued over enthusiasm. Stability remains the criterion. The internal cost continues its quiet accumulation. The man feels his endurance shortening. Long rides require more rest. Recovery takes longer. He adjusts without complaint, redistributing tasks naturally. The group absorbs this shift without disruption, further confirming its independence from his capacity. As summer approaches its height, the man reflects on the transformation he has witnessed. What began as shared survival has become a living system, capable of correction and growth without spectacle. His role now is largely custodial, preserving balance rather than advancing ambition. When evening light stretches across the grass and camps settle into familiar order, the wind moves as it always has, indifferent to scale or authority. It passes through the expanded Confederation without resistance, reminding those beneath it that durability is achieved not by domination, but by arrangements flexible enough to endure repetition without strain. Midsummer arrives with a measured intensity. The grass is thick, strong, and deep, bending under the weight of the sun but resilient to trampling. Streams trickle steadily, where once they were unpredictable. The wind maintains its presence, now tempered by heat, sweeping across the open land with the same impartial persistence that has governed countless seasons. The steppe holds its lessons quietly, visible only to those who watch. The man moves at the periphery, observing without intrusion. His presence is less about direction and more about confirmation. Disputes arise rarely, resolved swiftly by practices he helped establish. Decisions are made collectively, in accordance with routines repeated over years. The group functions as a system, and he senses that his influence now exists primarily in memory and example rather than in immediate action. Trade flows more predictably. Caravans traverse established paths, carrying goods and knowledge alike. The man notes the balance achieved. Exchanges occur with caution, and routes are respected without constant oversight. Networks now operate with a self-sustaining logic. The Confederation has become a larger organism, coordinated not by decree but by internalized expectation. An unexpected challenge surfaces when a distant band arrives, seeking inclusion under informal terms. Their customs differ, and friction arises naturally. The man intervenes subtly, encouraging integration through shared practice rather than imposition. Roles are adjusted, resources allocated carefully. The system adapts without collapse, preserving continuity while absorbing novelty. Patterns of justice solidify further. Memory guides action. Past resolutions inform present conflicts. Elders consult younger members and negotiation precedes enforcement. The man observes without dictating. Authority now resides in process, not in presence. This institutionalization reduces the risk of failure to the smallest possible margin. Expansion occurs through subtle persuasion rather than announcement. Smaller bands are drawn toward stability, observing that the rhythms of work, grazing, and trade produce predictability. Inclusion requires patience and adaptation. The man allows growth to proceed only when the conditions are fully met, recognizing that premature incorporation invites disorder. The internal cost becomes more pronounced. Long days weigh on him, the repetition of seasons sharpening aches and dulling the senses. Sleep is measured, meals simple. Even in the absence of conflict, responsibility bears down. Leadership here is invisible labor, unnoticed except when it falters. Yet reflection brings clarity. Observing the system function independently, the man understands the depth of his achievement lies not in expansion, but in resilience. Stability now defines influence more than presence, and control is expressed through the endurance of practice rather than the assertion of will. As sunlight wanes each evening, casting long shadows over the undulating grass, he rides slowly along the perimeters. Camps settle in harmony, trade routes hum softly, and the wind carries sound without alteration. Continuity has been embedded into the steppe itself, a reminder that authority sustained through order endures far beyond the presence of any single individual. Late summer drifts toward early autumn. The heat softens, and the grasses begin to fade from green to muted gold. Streams slow to shallow channels, and the wind sharpens in the mornings, cutting across the plain with a hint of frost yet to come. The steppe signals transition in its own quiet language. Subtle shifts in color, sound, and movement mark the passing of time. Those who have lived upon it learn to read these signs with care. The man rides among the peripheries, his pace deliberate. He observes the younger members, now fully responsible for the daily orchestration of grazing, trade, and labor. He intervenes only when subtle misalignments threaten coherence. Authority has become distributed. Leadership is a web of practiced routines more than a single figure's decisions. Yet his presence is still a stabilizing reference, a quiet assurance that patterns endure. Trade consolidates. Caravans move steadily, their loads balanced, their passage predictable. Networks of exchange operate across distances larger than before, yet the system remains robust. The man notes the reliance this creates, yet it is tempered by redundancy and mutual expectation. Dependence is structured, survival reinforced. Lessons from harsh winters and uncertain springs echo in every careful calculation. A minor conflict arises as some young riders test boundaries with neighboring bands. The impulse is familiar, rooted in inherited restlessness. The man observes, allows the friction to develop, then intervenes through method rather than force. Grazing areas are reassigned, responsibilities rotated, and the moment dissolves into routine. Discipline manifests through repetition, not threat. The consolidation of authority continues through structured interaction. Meetings follow agreed schedules. Labor is assigned with reference to capability rather than heritage. Elders and juniors alike adhere to norms established long ago, refined through countless adjustments. Leadership is procedural now. The man senses that the system could endure without him entirely, a realization both comforting and sobering. Expansion occurs gently. Smaller confederations, drawn by stability and predictable order, attach themselves naturally. Integration is deliberate, measured by capacity rather than ambition. Each addition requires negotiation and adherence to the established patterns. The man steps back further, observing without immediate intervention, ensuring the expansion strengthens rather than disrupts the whole. The internal cost deepens. Each day fatigue becomes more pronounced, aches linger longer, and sleep arrives reluctantly. He measures losses in silence. Animals that falter, humans who fall ill, minor miscalculations that could have been avoided. Leadership continues without acknowledgement, and yet its burdens remain undeniable. He reflects on the endurance of the system he has nurtured. What began as immediate survival has become a network of practices capable of withstanding both scarcity and growth. Responsibility, once personal and consuming, has transformed into structure and expectation. The steppe itself carries the imprint of order, visible in how the camps move, how trade circulates, how disputes dissolve before escalation. As autumn light stretches thin across the plains, the man rides slowly along the borders of the Confederation. Fires burn low in settled camps, animals rest in predictable patterns, and the wind passes without resistance. Continuity has become the measure of success, and the quiet lesson is clear. Resilience is created not through force or ambition, but through careful attention, repeated practice, and the patience to let structures endure beyond the presence of any one hand. The first frost appears along the distant hills, painting the steppe in muted silver. Shadows lengthen early, and the wind carries a subtle bite that speaks of months yet to come. Movement slows naturally. Animals cluster near shelter, and the rhythm of daily tasks becomes measured and deliberate. Time stretches and contracts with the season, marking the passage of survival as much as life itself. The man rides at the edge of the encampment, noting the patterns that have taken hold. Camps follow rotations without instruction. Water sources are accessed according to established sequence, and trade routes function as reliably as the wind crossing the grass. He sees the continuity he helped shape, visible in action rather than enforced by command. His presence is almost ceremonial, a reminder of history lived through restraint. Responsibility has shifted fully to the collective. Younger figures manage movement, resolve disputes, and negotiate with neighboring bands. Their competence is evident, yet it carries the imprint of the lessons he instilled. Leadership has become diffuse. The man recognizes that what matters now is not his guidance, but the capacity for the system to endure in his absence. Trade consolidates one last time before winter closes in. Caravans move steadily along paths smoothed by repetition, carrying supplies that have been calculated to sustain the Confederation through months of scarcity. Trust operates through expectation, and the smallest deviations are corrected quietly. The man watches, understanding that the stability of survival is maintained through adherence to patterns, not through assertion of will. A final challenge arrives with the shifting snow. A distant group, displaced by early frost, seeks temporary pasture. The man does not act immediately. Observers adjust boundaries through prior agreements. Exchange is measured, access regulated, and the threat dissolves without conflict. The system absorbs change by relying on its structure, not his intervention. Reflection comes quietly. He considers the months, the years, the seasons that have shaped not only the Confederation but himself. The burdens of leadership, the fatigue, the private grief, the constant vigilance, have been transformed into principles now held by others. The steppe moves beneath them as always, indifferent to individuals, yet responsive to the order they cultivate. Expansion has reached a natural limit. Integration of smaller bands has stabilized, and the Confederation now functions as a coherent whole. The man notes the subtle signs of continuity. Camps adjusting without instruction, trade moving predictably, disputes resolving themselves through memory of precedent. Growth now depends on stability, not ambition. The internal cost of leadership remains, but it has shifted from physical exertion to quiet observation. He measures seasons not by action alone, but by the endurance of the structures he has shaped. Fatigue is persistent, yet tempered by the satisfaction of systems operating without collapse. As the sun dips below the horizon, the steppe stretches into shadow. Fires burn low, animals settle, and wind drifts across the plain as it has for centuries. The Confederation stands intact, its patterns repeated and reinforced, ready to endure winter and seasons beyond. He pauses at the edge of the encampment, watching young leaders move through tasks he once performed. He understands that continuity is the true measure of success. The systems endure beyond a single presence, carrying responsibility forward through practice, habit, and quiet attention. And as the wind passes over the frost-hardened grass, it leaves behind a single truth, clear and impartial. The survival of order depends not on ambition, but on the discipline to let structures, once established, outlast the hands that created them. The steppe holds its lesson, and the story of the Confederation closes with the wintered grass, leaving space for the next chapter of expansion, integration, and governance, the foundations upon which the rise of the Mongol Empire will continue.